on the panel. Welcome. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. And Eric, do you have the questions? I think I sent them to you, but I just want to make sure. If not, I can send them to you right now.
Yeah, if you could send them to me right now, that'd be great.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah, thanks.
And just to clarify, so because I saw something about Eric on the email, but I didn't get a chance to really look at it completely. So are you a panelist or are you?
Yeah, he was listed as like a co-moderator, but I think he's a panelist. I'm going to treat Eric like everyone else.
Okay.
Eric will be chiming in. He's the director of public policy at Disability Rights California. And I don't know, Eric, in my world, you still qualify as a young adult. I realize you're probably aged.
It feels weird. It's weird now because so many, especially in the advocacy space, so many of these advocates are getting younger and younger. And now I feel old. So, but yeah, I'm based here in Sacramento. I've been with Disability Rights California for 4 years, and I've been in the advocacy space, disability advocacy space, for about 10 years or so.
Pleasure to meet you. I gotta say, I'm impressed that they were able to get you inside of a week.
Yeah, it's funny what can happen quickly when your boss reaches out and asks you to be on a panel.
And Eric, the audience, just for you and I haven't really had a chance to touch base. It's a statewide audience that's interested in health policy for young folks with disabilities, and they've had a number of state legislators and people doing advocacy at the national level and the state level. It's a 2-day conference, and we're one of many sessions that are happening. This is the last session before the closing.
Oh, fantastic.
Charis?
Thank you. Hey, Eric.
Hello.
I have a quick question about logistics before we go live. In the chat that we have access to, can everyone see that? I just need the reminder.
You should have access to the chat, Charis. Oh, sorry, this is Pip.
I do have access. I'm saying, can all the audience see our chat? Or is that
It looks like we can chat each other individually, and we can chat to the hosts and panelists, but I'm not seeing an option to chat the whole audience.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I can fix that.
Oh, there's something on mine that says everyone.
Okay,
That's
maybe
it. Just click that button.
And Eric, that's not really Pip Marks, but that's the person that is helping support the event.
I apologize, Holly. I apologize. I came in and had to re-enter, and I probably came in the wrong. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
So you have Andy. I just want to mention too that you're on at 1 o'clock to do your keynote. Are you good with that?
I am. And do I kind of disconnect and then reconnect from a different link?
It will, so it will close out this session, and then it should open up. If you have your browser open with the main event page, you can just click into the next session, or you certainly have some emails with some links that would take you straight there if needed.
Hello, hola, Victoria. Thank you very much for doing the interpretation.
Who is talking? I'm sorry. Who is talking? Tamika?
No, Pip is talking.
Oh, Pip. Oh, okay, good.
Victoria,
good.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Also,
Holly, if somebody could send me the link to the closing session, just so I have it at the top of my inbox, that'd be great, because I don't have it in my calendar slip, and I don't want to.
Sure, I'll do that right now.
Thank you so much.
JC has a question. Hi, JC.
More of an observation. Hi, Pip. But already, just with this amount of people on, the Wi-Fi on my end is glitching out somewhat. So my suggestion is that when each individual is making their statement, that the rest of us turn off our cameras, just to ease up on the Zoom buffer, because it doesn't really work very well when you got 20 people on with their cameras on and their audio on. That's my view when we actually go into the webinar, because I mean, from what these guys are all saying, it's a statewide audience, and Wi-Fi is different for everybody.
Yeah, good point, JC. Thank you.
And Pip, just so you guys know, the room has already opened up. Holly just notified me, so the attendees are indeed in the room. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that individuals can see our introductory slides so that we can get started. So if you're not speaking, if you could go off camera, that would be great. And Andy, if you'd like to go ahead and get started, you can do so.
Great, thank you. Welcome everybody to this session that I'm really excited to have the opportunity to moderate. My name is Andy Imparato. I am the Executive Director of Disability Rights California, and I'm on the planning committee for the conference. My pronouns are he, him. I am a middle-aged white guy wearing a scarf and a dress shirt and a sweater with a blurry background. And the topic of this panel is disability identity development. And you'll see as we explore the topic how it relates to this broader topic for the conference of health policy and health summit, and trying to improve healthcare for folks with disabilities and chronic conditions. So I am going to see if Victoria, our interpreter, has anything that she wants to announce in Spanish related to interpretation before we do the introductions. Tamika, are we good, or do we need to make any announcements related to translation?
No, you go ahead. You can go ahead and move forward.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the first question is just to ask our esteemed panelists to please introduce yourself and let the audience know what attracted you about participating in a panel related to disability identity development. And maybe I'll call on folks in the order that I have them in my participant list. So starting with Charis.
Thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. My name is Charis Hill. My pronouns are they, them. I am a white appearing, non-binary, androgynous looking person with a teal shirt on, and the background is a cluttered home environment. I am a disability rights activist and advocate. I do modeling and writing and speaking. And I am just over the hill of above young adult status. So I like joining this panel for sharing the perspective of if I had been diagnosed as a young adult, what that would have meant for me. So my disability happened later, as an adult. So I think I can share valuable perspective on what that's been like. So thank you for having me, Andy.
Great, thank you so much, Charis. And one thing I meant to mention, we lost a titanic leader in the disability movement over the weekend, Judy Heumann, and there's been a ton of media. It's actually been a beautiful thing to watch, lots of tributes to Judy coming from all over the world, literally. But I saw a quote about Judy from my friend Maria Town, who is the president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, and I thought it was very relevant to the topic of our panel. She said, and she was quoted in newspaper stories about Judy with this quote. She said, "Judy really helped people accept who they were as disabled people and take pride in their identity. And she helped so many people understand their own power as disabled people." So I hope that quote is very relevant to the topic that we're exploring today. And I just wanted to share that before we continue with the introductions. So next on my list, I have my good friend and colleague, Eric Charis. So over to you, Eric.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name's Eric Charis. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Director of Public Policy at Disability Rights California. And it's wonderful to be here with everyone. I would say that, and my disability, I was born with a physical disability, and I use a wheelchair. I've used a wheelchair for most of my life. And I would say that what attracted me to be on this panel is I really feel it's important to have people with lived experience with disabilities talking about the issues that impact our lives. And so I'm excited to get into the conversation and to really learn a lot from others and to see what other folks' thoughts are on these issues.
Great, thank you, Eric, and welcome. Next, I have Jake Linn.
Hello, my name is Jake. I am 23, grad student at California State University, Sacramento. For I guess I can describe what I look like. So I'm wearing a plaid shirt. I'm in a typical dorm room, glasses, and I have hair pushed back. And basically, I am here in part to discuss more of the media side. I created an initiative when I was 20 years old called Disability in Hollywood, which interviews prominent folks within the entertainment industry. And yeah, that's why I'm here. I want to be here.
Great, welcome, Jake. And next we have JC.
Thank you, Andy. My name is JC Guirre. I am dressed in professional attire and I feel conspicuously overdressed. I am pretty much got a generic background and I am white appearing. I was born with multiple birth defects. So I believe that it's important to acknowledge how positive disability identity helps advance disability rights, which is part of what attracted me to this panel. I believe that by identifying how positive disability identity helps to humanize people with disabilities, it will open the eyes of many in the mainstream public. Thank you.
Thank you, JC. Welcome. And next we have Sydney Reed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney. I'm a white appearing female with longish, dirty blonde hair, wearing a lavender sweatshirt and a gray t-shirt, and my background is blurred. And I was diagnosed with juvenile dermatomyositis, a rare autoimmune disease, along with overlapping lupus and a few other conditions as a teenager, which is what kind of brought me to this panel, in addition to my work as the operations director for Generation Patient, which is a nonprofit that creates events and programs for young adults with chronic and rare medical conditions. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about disability identity and everything that goes into that today.
Great, thank you, Sydney, welcome. And then we have Paige Bright.
Hi, I'm Paige Bright. I'm wearing a cardigan with dark brown hair and in my dorm room right now. And yeah, what brought me to this panel today in particular was, even though I was diagnosed with a disability when I was relatively young, it took me a really long time to feel comfortable in my own skin and to really have a positive identity with my disability. And so I'm excited to share a little bit about that today and hear what others have to say about this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Paige, welcome. So is there anybody on the panel who hasn't been introduced? All right, I think we're good. And I didn't mention my disability identity when I introduced myself, which is ironic since this is a panel on disability identity. So I'm a person with bipolar disorder or manic depression, which I've had since my last semester of law school, which is now over 30 years ago. And I've been out and open with my disability throughout my career. And I've definitely seen a lot of benefits to being out and open. The next question is, and all of these questions are for anybody who wants to answer them, and we don't need everybody to answer every question. So please just answer the questions that you're comfortable answering. But the next question for anybody who wants to take it is, please describe an aspect of your disability that can give you advantages in certain situations. Sometimes when we talk about disability, we assume negative, we kind of get into medical diagnoses, impairments, disorders. So I wanted to start with a question about what is cool or interesting or positive connected to your disability identity. So if people want to answer, you could raise your hand, come off mute, or turn on your camera, and then I'll know. So Paige, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, being diagnosed with a disability when I was in middle school taught me very early on how to be an advocate for myself, because I had to be in the classroom setting. And I've had to carry that with me throughout all of my life, just being able to speak up for myself in front of teachers and adults who have more responsibility than I do. And that was one of the few advantages that having a disability got me.
Great, thank you, Paige. Eric, I'll pick on you. Anything you want to add, and then we'll go to Sydney.
That sounds great. Yeah, for me, one distinct advantage that I have is honestly the use of a wheelchair. For me, being able to get around very easily and quickly using a wheelchair is a huge benefit for me. And it's given me a perspective that I really feel is important. I didn't always use a wheelchair when I was young. I walked exclusively with the support of leg braces, and got to a point where using a wheelchair was just going to be easier for me. So using the chair has given me a cool perspective to be able to relate to folks who might have a difficult time getting from point A to point B. But I see it as just such a huge benefit. And it's been, something that has given me a distinct advantage when it comes to traveling long distances, not having to stand for long periods of time and those sorts of things. So the wheelchair for me has empowered me to get into spaces and be a part of different communities that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to be a part of.
Great, thank you, Eric. And Sydney, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, so one positive that I can think of with my condition, it was actually kind of the reverse when I started out, was connecting with people. I think a lot of people that I've talked to, in addition to my own experience with chronic conditions or disabilities, it can be really isolating and can create barriers that make it really difficult to connect with people. And while I found that to be very true when I was first diagnosed and going through end of high school and college, I also found that as I really kind of came into my own and was able to connect with peers that also had disabilities, I found that those connections and relationships were a lot deeper and stronger and more meaningful. So that was, to me, something that I view as a positive.
Great, thank you, Sydney. Charis.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking, you know, which disability identity of mine do I choose? There are positives to each one, but I found myself chuckling about being autistic and having special interests. And one of those is gardening. And there are many benefits to that. I get to, you know, eat produce that I grew. And I get to really engage in something I care about a lot and know, you know, everything there is to know. And then I can help educate other people who are interested in learning. So I think there are a lot of positives that come with being autistic that perhaps people aren't necessarily aware of unless you're autistic.
That's great. And are you growing something right now that you're excited about?
I am always growing things, Andy. I have almost 24 fruit trees on my property, and I'm just starting seedlings in my greenhouse for my spring, summer vegetable garden.
Very cool. So let me just see if anybody else wants to add to this question, and if not, I will move on to the next one. So seeing no cameras on or hands up, I'm going to move to the next question, which is, you know, disability identity and disability pride are kind of connected. And I think some people sometimes have a hard time understanding the concept about disability pride. So I just wanted to ask the panelists, to the extent that you have pride in your disability identity, what are you proud about? And is it possible to have pride and still struggle with some aspects of your disability? So which brave person wants to take that first? Charis, thank you.
I'll go, yes, you brave. So disability pride is something that it took years to realize that I could have pride in this identity. And so when I was diagnosed with a chronic disease as I was 26 years old, I saw it as something that needed fixing for me to be whole. And it was only after I learned about the social model of disability that I realized that I was looking at it all wrong, and that I could be proud of this identity that does occupy a huge part of how I navigate the world. At the same time, I have a chronic disease that is debilitating, and that really impacts things about my life negatively, no matter what structures are in place to support me living. And so it's a constant battle between public facing advocacy about, you know, it's okay to say the word disabled, You don't have to change a word just to, destigmatize the identity, while also, crying myself to sleep in pain some nights. And it's just a really interesting question that I don't think there is a right or a wrong answer to, and that I'm going to be figuring out for the rest of my life.
Thank you, Charis. Jake.
Yeah. Hello. So I'm going to enter the last question in this question. So the last question, please describe an aspect of your disability that gives you advantages in certain creations. I was born with a couple of so ADHD I was born with, I don't know a difference. I would say that I don't know before, after, I really don't. But then I have migraines, right? And those suck. No one deserves migraines. They're not great. So I would say that's my answer on that. And on the ADHD side with disability pride, I have other disabilities as well. I accept myself for all that I am. I'm Jewish, LGBT plus, and have a disability. What is hard when I start to question myself, the love of myself, is when there's barriers, or like on campus right now, there is a lot of anti-Semitism for LGBT. A lot of rights are being taken away right now. And then for disability, I've had an employer who told me about someone else, because I didn't disclose, because I'm a little bit scared, not scared, but I'm nervous because sometimes I don't know how my employer is going to react. I ask, but I'm always, I have to question if I'm going to face retaliation. And so one time when I worked in a grocery store, not going to say who, grocery store, this manager told me that someone else with ADHD was going to be fired because they had that disability. And so again, I don't question the love for myself, but when someone brings that up to then question, is there a problem with me? Like, why is there a problem that they see with me? That is when I start to question myself, not the love of myself, but just question, do I deserve X, Y, Z?
Thank you, Jake. JC.
Yeah, so I was going to answer question number 3, the one that you just asked. And I thought about it, and really being disabled really taught me to appreciate the value of just being different, So I've learned to take pride in the differences that I have, and I've learned not to try and fit in the box. For me, my disability has become a blessing, because it's allowed me to develop a lot more creative problem solving skills. I embrace it as a blessing. I really do. Besides, as my mom is fond of telling me, if I wasn't disabled, I'd probably be a jerk. But one thing that I have noticed is I do struggle with the limitations that are directly imposed by my disability. Other people do try to put limits on me, but that's their problem, and I can't really take ownership of how other people view me, but I can take ownership of how I view myself.
That's great. Well said, JC. Eric.
Yeah, my disability, being one where I use a wheelchair, is one that is recognizable if folks see me. So I've always had a disability identity in that way, that I've owned my disability. I've been somebody who's been a part of the disability community throughout my life, and kind of own that also. But I developed disability pride when I became more active in adaptive sports, and wheelchair basketball in particular. It gave me a true sense of community and belonging. I was able to connect with other young Black men with disabilities, young Black boys with disabilities. I was able to travel throughout the country with other disabled children who were passionate about sports and wanted to have a good time and stay active. And it really elevated to a different level when I got into even more disability advocacy with other people with other types of disabilities. So then it wasn't just the wheelchair users, but it was the wheelchair users, it was deaf folks, it was people who are blind, people with mental health disabilities. We were all on the same team, advocating and kind of being a part of this community together. And it gave me an additional sense of pride and excitement about my disability. So so that's kind of what pushed it for me. And I think, others have talked about it also, but some parts of our disabilities can bring about certain challenges. And I think it's how we are able to approach those challenges, how we are able to navigate them. And of course, really difficult when outside of our control, the systems or buildings or other parts of our lives are not as accessible as they should be. That can, of course, make it very difficult. And some of that can be multiplied when you add the discrimination element, of course, to it. So having the disability pride and the communities that we have has been a huge benefit through my life, even when facing discrimination or facing obstacles that create barriers. It's having a community that you can relate with and talk to about these things, and then hopefully grow the movement for the better moving forward.
Thank you, Eric. Paige.
Yeah, I just wanted to second Charis's point. As someone similarly with the chronic pain condition, it's just, and when it comes to pride and disability pride in particular, there are some days when I just feel like proud that I've gotten so far with my disability, but there are other days when it just feels like I still have so far to go, which is why I think it's really interesting hearing from other young adults during this panel, right? Like we still have quite a bit of our lives to like deal with this and deal with these questions nonstop, essentially.
Thank you. Sydney.
I raised my hand and then I lowered it again. And then hearing Paige speak, I just, what both Paige and Charis said is very true, in that it's this constant, at least for me, constant struggle between feeling pride, which I do at this point in myself and my experience, but also feeling still like pressured to sometimes paint my experience in an overly positive light in certain situations to make others more comfortable with my narrative. So it's kind of still a struggle. But yeah, I do believe like I still feel, I don't feel shame anymore really associated with my experience. And I think that's a huge, at least for me, a huge step in the right direction.
Thank you, Sydney. And one thing that I would just add, for me, one of the things that I'm proud about is being connected to Judy Heumann and Justin Dart and all these Mark Bristow, all these phenomenal leaders, and in the parent movement, being connected to Julie Beckett and Polly Arango and other phenomenal leaders who literally changed the world for children and adults with disabilities. And I think we can all be proud to be part of that movement, the impact that that movement is having, and kind of building on what's already happened to try to take it to further levels and have more impact. So for me, that's part of the pride, probably because I'm a policy wonk. I'm proud of the policy accomplishments of our movement as a civil rights movement. So the next question gets at something that sometimes gets called inspiration porn. And I want to see if anybody wants to talk about the difference between having disability pride, pride in your identity as a person with a disability, and being someone else's inspiration, like somehow your story or some aspect of your story inspiring other people. So does anybody want to talk about kind of the difference between disability pride and inspiration porn? Jake.
I'm going to give a couple media examples here. Let's compare Forrest Gump and Wonder versus Crip Camp with Judy Heumann and those activists. So on one hand, with Crip Camp, you have Judy Heumann, James LeBret, and a lot of other advocates, and they're making a change. And it's inspiring because of their work, and you don't feel bad about them. It's like, yes, you're doing the right thing. Let's go. It motivates me. Hopefully it motivates y'all who've seen it. Versus you have Forrest Gump and Wonder, who don't really do anything. They just exist, but they're seen as an inspiration because they're living. And then you kind of feel, or it makes, maybe not me, but it's like whoever wrote it wanted you to feel bad about them. And so that's kind of the differences that I've seen. And unfortunately, you still see that in media. I think it's getting better, but that's how I would see the difference between the two.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I think Forrest Gump is an interesting example because you also had an actor that didn't have a disability portraying somebody with, you know, a number of disabilities, which is a common problem in Hollywood. So that's another distinction, I think, between Crip Camp, where you had real people with disabilities portraying themselves. One of the ways that inspiration porn gets talked about is it's really about making the non-disabled person feel better about themselves. So you tell a story about a disabled person that's designed to make non-disabled people feel better about themselves. But anything anybody else wants to add on kind of how you distinguish between disability pride and inspiration porn? Eric?
Yeah, this is Eric. I think one of the things that makes disabled people pause when we hear certain compliments, if you will, is when disabled people get praised just for doing everyday regular things that we do all the time. And we get praised because of the fact that we have disabilities and we have the if you will, the gall to do these regular things. And I think that that's when it crosses a line of inspiration porn and doesn't get into just the fact that, kind of disabled people doing regular things and disability pride and that sort of thing. So I think that, wheelchair users, we experience it often, driving ourselves, grocery shopping for ourselves, kind of doing those types of regular things. And you have to, because we hear these things so often, the inspiration porn, we have to know when and how to respond appropriately if it's something that we choose to do. If we choose to kind of give guidance to folks who intend well, but we don't want them to fall into a situation of inspiration porn constantly with folks with disabilities, it might be all right for us to give some guidance and open up with them about, especially if it's somebody that we care about, give them opportunities to learn where it might be okay to talk about, something that is really interesting or really exciting about, when you see somebody do something, but not when it's, kind of crosses that line of becoming inspiration porn and becoming demeaning in that way.
Yeah, Eric, hearing you describe that distinction, it's like if you do something as a human being that other non-disabled human beings would be inspirational, then it makes sense for the disabled person to inspire. But if you do something that for other people it's not inspirational,
Right.
and the disabled person going to the grocery store should also not be inspirational. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a good distinction. Charis.
Thank you. I do want to give a shout out to our what we call Crip ancestor Stella for coming up with the term inspiration porn, which, you know, is, I guess, inspirational in a good way, because she, you know, reclaimed a definition for ourselves. So I want to extend this facet of inspiration porn to when non-disabled people create tech for disabled people without the input of disabled people, and it's, you know, applauded as like, oh, we created something for disabled people, like this wheelchair that walks upstairs, and they, you know, get all this media coverage for this inspiring work that's going to save disabled people from having to roll up a ramp. And it's this, you know, again, centering non-disabled people's desire to not build infrastructure that allows disabled people to navigate the world freely, and design without disabled people, you know, goes, hopefully most of us are familiar with the saying, nothing about us without us. It's inspiration porn is separating the issue from disability justice to holding disabled people back with barriers to full participation to society. So I thought it was important to bring up the fact that inspiration porn extends even beyond disabled people, to really anything that makes disability more like tolerable to society, largely non-disabled.
Thank you, Charis, and thanks for bringing up Stella Young. If people are interested in seeing, Stella Young was a disability leader in Australia who has a wonderful TED Talk. If you Google her, you'll see the TED Talk where she talks about inspiration porn. Paige.
Yeah, I also just wanted to bring up that there's a huge difference between when someone close to me, like my mom or a very close friend, when they recognize something that I'm doing that is difficult, and when someone I know way less does the same thing. Because some days it is difficult to like take a shower or do my laundry or something like that. It's just it's using up so many spoons to do. And it's not that I'm against being recognized for that, especially when it's someone who knows what I'm going through, but it's very different when it's someone who has no business necessarily telling me that it is inspirational, you know?
Thank you. JC.
Yeah, well, I guess, you know, in order to really talk about this inspiration, I mean, you got to also, you know, really clearly define it. For me, you know, disability pride is knowing your own limitations and understanding that the accomplishments you make can be truly amazing, even if they don't seem so to everybody else. Because I think sometimes we tend to try to put disabled people into a little box and make them feel like they're just like everybody else. And, you know, to a large extent, we're not. We are different, and it's okay to be different. And, you know, if we do something that's really, really difficult for us, you know, it's an accomplishment, and it should be given the appropriate level of inspiration. But as Paige said, there is a certain level of social decorum around that. You know, how much is really appropriate from a complete stranger? But, you know, on the inspiration side of things, you know, so the average public, the public is marveling at how far we've come. I mean, in 30 years, we've gone from being barely tolerated to being highly present in social and political discourse. That's amazing. And that's an inspiration. But there is, like the other panelists have mentioned, limits as to whether that inspiration is a good thing. But, you know, one thing that is important to mention about inspiration is, I mean, take this panel. We're inspiring people to change their perspectives on disabled people. And that is the best way that you can inspire people. At my local family resource center, many parents were hopeful for their children's future when they met my mom and me, and they got to talk to me, because they got to see how far I'd come, and it gave them, you know, hope that their kids could come as far, if not farther. So inspiration, while it can be a negative thing, it's important to also acknowledge the many, many ways it can be a powerful force for change.
Thank you, JC. Sydney, I think you'll have the last word on this one.
So I also wanted to kind of acknowledge, because I feel like a lot of times inspiration, and I feel like inspiration and resilience are two things that kind of go hand in hand in terms of what we're talking about. And I feel like just as much as they're meant sometimes to build us up, sometimes they're also kind of used against us, or they're kind of weaponized by different systems. I mean, I've been in doctors' offices where, you know, they talk about resilience like as if they're judging you for not being that resilient, inspirational, you know, thing that you're supposed to be. So I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but I feel like it's something that I've confronted a few times. So I also wanted to mention that because I feel like in our society, we kind of sometimes, in certain areas, we aggressively push this label of resiliency or inspiration onto disabled people without adequately acknowledging the issues that we face within society. So.
Great point. Thank you, Sydney. So now we're going to shift to some questions that really get to how do we develop our identity and how do we develop our ideas about disability. And one of our panelists, Jake, has a short video to really lift up one aspect of how many of us, both parents and individuals, develop concepts of disability and identities, which is the media, entertainment, you know, kind of what we consume and the images of disability that we consume. So Jake, I think if it's ready, and Tamika, if it's ready, why don't we go ahead and show Jake's video?
Okay, and I'm just queuing that up. Give me 1 second, please.
Thank you. No worries.
Walking home from ADD, another dating disaster. I mean, I brushed my teeth retarded. I rode bus retarded.
Doctor said we'd be lucky if Arnie lived to be 10.
I would say disability in general is just, I can do whatever, but there are additional obstacles to get me to that point.
I feel like a lot of disability activism has centered around this idea of I'm not sick, but like in my case, I actually am sick. Like that's almost entirely my problem.
What disability means to me is exceptional, honoring, and beautiful.
I think that media gives us a way of seeing and understanding ourselves and other people. And so having disability included in those representations is so important for what people think is possible. A large part of my frustration with representations of disability in media in general are that you're either cured, you're socially ostracized, or you die. And there's not really much room for other options.
in regard to the ADHD side, it's at the end of every joke. And that has created this huge misconception, I think, of people with ADHD, that we can't focus on anyone or anything.
A couple years ago, there was this popular teen drama show known as Pretty Little Liars, in which there was a blind character, was always seen with black sunglasses and their white cane. Most blind people don't wear sunglasses, and if they do, it's by preference.
Sometimes a friend will bring up a movie to me, like, hey, I heard that this movie is about chronic illness, because there are so few of them that when there is one, it's somehow news. So I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll check out this show, I'll check out this movie. And then it'll be a lot of the same stereotypes, and I'll get so frustrated. Like, I had hope for this one, and here we go all over again.
Personally, I can't think of any TV show or film exactly that has accurately portrayed me as a visually impaired woman. I feel like a lot of my interactions are based from the generic stereotype that I mentioned. If I am wearing my black sunglasses and using my white cane, it is like obvious that people will assume I'm blind when I'm partially sighted and I can see them staring at me. Or there's been times where I maybe might have steered off the direction that I'm headed towards, and somebody will approach me and grab me and assume I need help, when in reality I don't.
And where people don't think I can have a relationship or just do anything a typical person can do without people making fun of it, it really hurts. And that's one of the reasons why I don't always share my disability with my employer. And for example, with that, I had an employer who told me about another employee who said that they had ADHD, and my employer said we're probably gonna have to fire them because they just can't pay attention.
I really wish that there were just more funding opportunities for filmmakers with disabilities.
Also, consider hiring a person with that disability. Like, why not? I mean, not only do they have the disability, but they know how to portray it best.
Thank you, Jake, for sharing that with the audience and for your leadership. I know you're doing a lot on that issue to try to make the media and Hollywood do better. So appreciate your leadership. And I think, I know on the mental illness side, when people do surveys of how people get information about mental illness, the number one source is media and entertainment. And the messages they get about mental illness from media and entertainment are not positive messages. They tend to connect with violence, violent behavior, just a lot of stereotypes. So it's a critically important issue. And I know you, Jake, you're working on it kind of in a cross disability way, which I really appreciate. So I'm gonna move down to a question that was further down and then come back to question number 5. But I'm going to jump to question 8, which I think speaks to the Family Voices audience directly, and is probably a question a lot of folks have coming to this panel, which is, some of the folks in the audience are parents or grandparents or family members of disabled children. What advice would you have for parents and family members about how to introduce their kids to disability culture and support them in developing an identity around their lived experience with their disability? And are there things that parents and family members should avoid doing? And I'm asking this question because we just heard about a big influence that affects parents and family members and young people with disabilities. So this question is kind of, okay, given the reality of where the media is and the efforts to try to change it, what are things that parents and family members can do to help expose folks to a more positive image around disability? Yeah, Jake.
Sydney, did you want to go first? No.
Oh, no, you go for it. I'll go after.
Sounds good. So Yeah, I also want to say, sorry, I'm trying to get back to the question. I would say what we're often taught in media is how we interact with the world. And I'm guilty of that as well. For better or for worse, I'm guilty of that. And what I would say is, if you're struggling with trying to find, what can my family member, I don't want to say achieve, but what is the possibility, I would say watch TV. I'm trying to see if I can put in the chat here some great disability representation. Again, not every disability has been shown. Unfortunately, I think it's doing a lot better, but there's still such a lack of representation. But I would say that media is one of the best teachings. I recommend you probably should watch it first to make sure, I don't know what age your family member is, but might want to do that just in case, and to see if it's appropriate as well in the sense of, is it more of an inspirational porn like we discussed earlier, or is this more of just the person's life? You're not really seen as inspiration, but I would say media is one of the best teachers.
Great. And Jake, do you want to just mention the particular shows that you put in the chat?
Yeah, of course. Well, now I can't see it. Let me.
It looks like you've got Merli.
Merli, yeah. So that is a Spanish TV show that I watched recently, and there is a woman with Down syndrome, and that basically shows pretty independent, which is awesome. And then it also, I know there's some clinicians out there, and there's one person, trigger warning, there's going to be AIDS, that they're diagnosed with AIDS, and it is the worst way possible to diagnose anybody. So I think that they make it an effort like this should not be done. And I lost the rest of the chat. Here we go. The Politician. It doesn't as much discuss the disability. It doesn't solely discuss the person's disability. It's more that person in general. And then also shows more than just the disability as that character. They're also very sarcastic. They're LGBT plus. It's great. The L Word, also positive representation. And then Born This Way is a reality TV show that came out in the 2010s about people with Down syndrome just living their lives. And it's great. Again, there's so much more TV shows and films you can watch, and they're not all disabilities are shown here because there's so many and everyone has their own experience. But I would just do some research, and that would, I think, be beneficial.
Good, thank you. JC.
So really, for me, when I've seen and talked to other parents and of disabled children, and the thing that I've noticed is that many of us we somewhat get nervous and awkward about it. And the best thing to do is be upfront about the disability and encourage, those with a disability to tell their story to those with questions. The more they tell the stories, the more they're comfortable with it themselves. It's not a sickness or disease, and necessarily, it's not something to be ashamed of. We can't expect to be fit into a little 2x2 box of a normalist's worldview. We got to champion the accomplishments that are difficult for those who struggle with those things, and teach people with disabilities how to handle negative comments and people who are, disrespectful of those with disabilities. That's my take. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, JC. Sydney.
I just wanted to mention the value of peer support and finding community. So if there is any way that as parents, you can help your kids find community. I know our organization, Generation Patient, offers virtual peer support meetings, but I also know that there are tons of organizations out there right now that offer the same virtual or the same sort of virtual meetings. And any way that you can help your kids connect with community and peers. For me personally, I know that has been a huge part of helping me to feel, to really develop a disability identity to begin with, and also developing the language that has really helped me communicate with doctors, with, healthy peers, with my parents and family. It's been really, really huge. So I think that's a really important part.
Sydney, I'm guessing that you had an identity as a patient and part of a patient movement before you had an identity as a person with a disability and part of a disability movement. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how are those two identities different or similar?
I kind of, from my stance, I see them as the same. I am a patient with a disability. I think maybe it's because of the particular disability that I have, a chronic condition, that I use the word patient a lot. But I think I use them interchangeably. But I definitely had identified first as a patient, but it wasn't when I think being able to identify as either without shame, that came at the same time. I think prior to that, I just wanted, I think most people at a certain age, you want to be like everyone else. You don't want to stand out, at least not in certain ways. I remember not wanting to be labeled the sick girl for a really long time. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that's helpful. Thank you. Charis.
Yeah, I want to bring up my experience with becoming whole in my disability identity, where, I mentioned before that when I was diagnosed with a chronic disease at age 26, I saw it as like I was broken. I would never be whole again unless my disease was cured. But after I found disability pride and how you can't separate disability from the rest of me, that I was already a whole person, and that trying to separate my chronic disease from me was what was fracturing me, and that I could be broken and whole at the same time. And it's the reason I use identity first language. I call myself a disabled person rather than a person with a disability, because I'm a queer person. I'm not a person who has a queer identity or something. I don't separate the other identities. So why would I separate disability? I also want to mention that autonomy is one of the biggest parts of anyone being an individual, and your family members are people. And so anything that you can do to support your family members' autonomy, which means listening to what they want, actually trying to understand who they are as a person. We all have unique needs and desires beyond being fed and housed and all that. And I want to echo Jake's point of consuming media that portrays us in a positive light and doing it together. I suggest watching Crip Camp, reading media by disabled people like Judy Heuman's book, Rolling Warrior, as well as her memoir, Being Human. And there are so many other books, Year of the Tiger by Alice Wong, Haben by Haben Girma, because this is media by disabled people that discusses our rich history and ancestry and disability culture in fighting for rights and justice, and learning about that together means that you're learning history together, but you're also opening space to learn from your disabled relative.
Thank you, Charis. Those are great suggestions. So now I'm going to go back to question 5, which is another important place where we get identity and information around disability. A lot of us and our families learn about disabilities first from doctors and other professionals. Do you feel that clinicians, educators, paraprofessionals, nurses, do you feel that they're learning enough about how to help their patients develop positive disability identities, or their students develop positive disability identities as part of their professional training? JC.
I gotta say that the answer to that question, at least in my experience, has been no. Many health professionals avoid talking about disability identity in a forthright fashion. They kind of tend to skirt around it. They use labels like special or unique. And I realize that a lot of that is to soothe the concerns of parents and guardians who are kind of thrown for a loop when they find out their child has a disability in the first place. And my county was part of the California Children's Services whole child model, which was essentially to move all of children and youth with special healthcare needs healthcare into the Medi-Cal managed healthcare plan. When my care coordination moved from CCS to my primary care doctor, he had no idea how to handle my assortment of birth defects and disability. He was completely at a loss. So, but because I'd always talked openly about it, I was able to confidently explain to him and help him to understand me as a whole person, which gave him the time and the personal knowledge of me to become comfortable with my multitude of disabilities. It was extremely difficult to explain it, but Dr. Sapamasai, he's a great doctor and a very humble dude, so he was able to eventually learn how to handle all of that. But, beyond that, both health professionals and educational professionals, you can't just pretend like we're everyone else. There is, limitations, and a lot of the training surrounding special education or just regular education teachers does not provide training on acknowledging the difficulties that we have as people with disabilities, but also the celebrating the accomplishments that do seem trivial, as I've mentioned before. For me, the worst thing that many educational professionals can do is pity me. The pity that they extend to us in their ideas about being gracious, it can feel degrading sometimes and very minimalizing of who we are and what we're capable of. But a lot of that comes from a belief that having a disability makes us broken or defective, that somehow we need to be fixed. There's a lot of discussions on my campus right now about CRISPR and how it can be used to prevent children being born with disabilities. And that right there is a prime example of how people with disabilities are viewed as not valued, or you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you, JC. Paige.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. I think the answer is no. And just speaking from personal experience, the reason I say that is just because I've never had conversations with professionals or doctors or educational professionals about my disability identity, which is really a shame. There's a lot of people who have known that I've had a disability throughout the years, but who just don't want to talk about it or don't know how to talk about it. So from that experience, I'd say that there isn't enough learning about it. Now, granted, of course, this comes with a grain of salt, which is that I also could have initiated some of these, but I think especially when it comes to healthcare providers, some amount of it should also be given to the healthcare providers to bring up in the first place.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. And if you look at medical training, I think there's also an opportunity to bring the lived experience perspective into the classroom as part of the medical training. And it feels like that doesn't happen enough for a lot of clinicians. And if to the extent that they have people with lived experience, sometimes those folks don't have a strong disability rights frame. And it's more about kind of reinforcing how the diagnosis affects their daily lives. It doesn't always get into discrimination or identity development or pride. But thank you. So I see Eric.
Yeah, I pretty much say ditto to many of the comments that have been stated. And, you know, unfortunately, when it comes to the competency, the disability cultural competency of a lot of medical professionals, it's a flip of the coin. If you get lucky and you get a medical professional who really gets it and who spent time understanding it, then you'll be really fortunate and be in a situation where you'll want to hold on to that medical professional in your life as long as you can. Unfortunately, though, there are so many who don't get it and don't take the time needed to really understand the variety of different diagnoses and kind of the spectrum of different diagnoses that many of us have. So I'd say that it's something that should continue to be a priority in the disability community, but it also shouldn't be on us all the time to educate and inform professionals. Like, they should prioritize our community in a way where they go out and learn what they need to learn and understand what they need to understand when it comes to how to work with people with a variety of disabilities.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I see Lisa Scheuer has a great comment in the chat. I learned from a great mom, if the medical professional is willing to say, I don't know, they're a keeper. Sydney.
I was just going to add, obviously, kind of the same with everybody else, and that, yeah, I haven't had an overly positive experience in as far as learning about like my disability identity and being able to form that, at least in the clinical setting. There are a few exceptions to that, that are, as everyone has said, like, you find that one, or not one, but those good doctors, and you do whatever you can to hold on to them. But I've also found a lot of people, or not, or a lot of people, whether it's in a medical setting, I've also experienced this in a higher education setting, people telling me how I should identify. You know, don't say you're not handicapped, you're handy capable. You're not disabled, you're differently abled. You're not a patient, you're a person, which obvious. Or even as Charis was talking about how she prefers to use identity first language, but I've had people that say, oh, you're not a disabled person, you're a person with a disability. And it's really discouraging to hear somebody, you know, tell you, oh, don't say it that way, that's incorrect, especially when they're not the person, you know, living my life. So I found that to be a struggle in just forming my own identity, because it can be really confusing when everyone's telling you what to think and how to feel and what to say.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. Just a correction, Charis uses they, them pronouns, but your point is well taken.
My apologies, sorry.
No worries. Jake?
Okay. I will say, I'm not a clinician. I don't like blood. I know it's a very tough job. That doesn't excuse the fact that if you are in different communities, Black, Indigenous, woman, trans, not an English speaker, etc., you see on the news how much discrimination they face, and it's absolutely unacceptable. And then there's also more too. And then you add the disability side, you are often advocating for yourself, especially as an adult, advocating for yourselves. And sometimes you don't know what's happening. I have two examples. One, when I was a kid, my doctor told me that I was fat when I was like 6 years old. And then I developed an eating disorder. And then for recently, a little bit recently, I told my doctor I was having pain in my head, and could it be migraines? I don't know. And he said, well, yeah, it's on your head. And I'm like, no kidding, but like I'm in pain. So that's why I'm here. And so having to question that was an uphill battle. So what I'll say for clinicians out there, just in general, is that you have a human being in front of you. They have emotions, they have family members, they have friends, they have a life. I mean, and if you say something that could, what you say can greatly impact someone for the rest of their life, for better, for worse. And so what I'll say is that just remember, behind that, I don't want to say number, but that name is a person. And so it's very important that we're all treated as humans, because we are all human.
Great, thank you, Jake. And Tamika sent a note to the panel members that the session is going to end at 12:45. I apologize. I thought we had until 1 o'clock, but Tamika, do we have like a 15-minute break?
You can go a little bit past that if you need to. It'll just allow you enough prep time for the next session.
But we're supposed to have a break between 12:45 and 1, is that right?
Yeah, but you can go a little over. We still have time.
Okay. Well, I know since we are running short on time, why don't we do this? I'm interested, if any panel member, if you look at the questions that I haven't asked, if there's one that you're really interested in answering that relates to this topic around disability identity development, why it's important for us to have, or helpful for us to have, a strong disability identity as we enter adulthood and as we interact with the healthcare system and other systems as adults. That may be a good big picture thing to end on. But Paige, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, one of the questions that I was interested in particular was if it helps be comfortable in your own skin as a disabled person when interacting with healthcare providers and other professionals, and if so, how? I definitely think the answer to this question is yes, and I wanted to bring up an example where when I had a different doctor for the first time who had a disability, they were asking me about my meds and if they were helping, and I finally felt comfortable enough to say, no, this isn't working. This isn't working for me. What new things can we try? And it took having someone who made me feel comfortable saying that as a doctor to really advocate for myself and get what I needed as a patient.
Great, thank you, Paige. JC.
I was also looking at that same question, and I just got to say that I think it's necessary to be comfortable in your own skin. You know, it not only does that help you, but it also puts others at ease, and makes them more willing to give you the accommodations you need or provide you the assistance that you need. You know, because they're no longer feeling awkward of, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? You know, when people are uncomfortable because they don't know, you know, a lot of doctors are afraid of being sued these days. So it makes them more willing to interact with you. When people aren't willing to interact with you, they tend to kind of shut down and just try and push you through as fast as they can. I have to be comfortable in my own skin when I talk to my professors at college, because especially the ones that were taught before the American with Disabilities Act came into full force. A lot of them are either uncomfortable or uncertain, and they really have no idea on how to really interact with me. So by being comfortable, I give them the confidence to be comfortable in return, and then we can have a constructive conversation.
Thank you, JC. Charis.
Yeah, I was looking at the questions, Andy, that you prepared, and I think it's important to bring up intersectionality in the disability conversation, because I'm a trans person, I'm a disabled person, I live in poverty, I also have a college degree. I mean, all of these things impact how I navigate the world, how I understand the world. And 3 of those are marginalized identities. If I was just disabled, you know, I would have an easier time than if I'm disabled and trans and impoverished. And in certain situations, I have to decide whether I disclose all of those identities for my own safety, especially when I'm using my wheelchair. I'm in a public place where I'm not sure if outing myself as a trans person will put me in an especially vulnerable position. At the same time, when pride comes into the conversation, I have pride in being trans. It's a big part of who I am. I have pride in being disabled. I'm not proud of being impoverished. I'd really like to not be, but it is a fact of my existence. So I think, you know, you can't talk about disability without also talking about all the other intersecting identities that people have. And the more identities you have, the more marginalized you are. I lost my train of thought. It was really important, Andy. I really wanted to share it, but I lost it. So
Charis, let me bring up something I heard you say in one of our prep sessions, which was, in some ways, being out with your disability identity can be a form of privilege. And if you have other identities that put you at greater risk, being out as a disabled person can be more difficult. I'm probably not saying it right, but I heard you say something to that effect.
You're probably remembering it more than I am. I wish I could remember and say whatever it is that you're remembering and referencing. I will just say, you know, and it goes vice versa. You can't talk about disability without bringing other identities in, and you can't have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion if you don't include disability. A lot of efforts around that are missing out on the fact that disabled people are in every single one of those groups, and that the DEI work is not going to work if disabled people have not been wrapped into that from the very start. If I remember, Andy, what I was saying, then I will come back and say it.
No worries. Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, thank you. And I was at first looking at the question that Charis answered, but I will answer a different question. So question number 10 is, do you have any advice for folks in the audience who may be starting to self-identify, but are still trying to find their footing? And, you know, it's an interesting experience to start to self-identify and to be able to have ownership and pride over your disability identity. And I would say to go at your own pace. I think that for everyone, it's different, depending on what the disability is, depending on family background, cultural background, depending on other identities that individuals are navigating, as Charis mentioned. So I think that it's important to feel absolutely comfortable with how you want to come out as a disabled person, if you want to come out as a disabled person, and to be able to have pride and to be able to have a sense of community when you're able to do so. So the biggest thing to me is to be able to go at your own pace and to feel supported. And one piece of kind of advice or recommendation, and I think everybody here has mentioned it, is I'd encourage people who are navigating that space early on to try to find others with disabilities to develop a sense of community for yourself. And nowadays, of course, you can do that virtually. You can do that within your own community, kind of physical location. But there are so many different opportunities now with technology to be able to connect with people at different stages of their disability identity. And I think it can all be beneficial long-term for folks who are entering into a space of self-identification with their disability.
Great, thank you, Eric. Jake.
I'm going to answer this. I'm going to put it in the chat real quick. How are younger disabled leaders and self-advocates changing the conversation around disability? And I'm going to put a couple of examples. Some I've interviewed, some I haven't. You have an activist, a Paralympian, international activists changing how we discuss climate change and pollution, and then someone who you see a lot on runway fashion shows, all of that. People with disabilities aren't going away. And I feel like this movement is, I mean, we're on a ride and we're not going down. And I would say for clinicians, for my members, for all the audience out there, for resources on how to potentially interact with people, or maybe or good representation, I highly recommend TikTok or Instagram. TikTok may go away soon if you live in this country, who knows? But if you look up the hashtags, if you put like a disability and then hashtag, let's say doctor's office, you will find a lot of those resources. And I'm not saying, spend like 100 hours straight watching this, but that's what I would recommend, is those resources, because unfortunately, Hollywood, Bollywood, Europeans doing better, but we're not there yet where there's stellar, amazing disability representation. And
Thanks,
those are
Jake.
stories.
But
Yep.
it sounds like you're going to help us get there. So again, I appreciate your leadership. JC.
Yeah, I gotta say that following up right from that, it feels like the disability movement itself has changed. It's no longer normal people defending people who are disabled and their rights. It's now shifted to the disabled not only actively participating in the movement, but now we're leading the movement and shaping the discussions around disability rights. And like Jake has said, we don't have stellar representation in the media, but the more that disabled people are accurately represented in the media, the more tolerant people become. And, it will definitely change how disabled people are viewed within the next few decades.
Thank you, JC. So I don't see any hands up, and I know we're getting close to the end of our time. So I just want to acknowledge and thank all of the panel members. It's been a real honor and privilege to work with you on this panel. I'm thrilled with the folks that Nick and Pip Marks and everybody at Family Voices tapped to be part of this panel. And again, it's just been delightful to moderate the panel. I think we're going to close with a video, a shorter video from Jake that is more of a call to action on the media front. So Tamika, am I right? Do we have that other video ready to go?
Yes, I'm just getting it started right now.
Thank you so much. And I also just want to acknowledge Tamika, thanks for helping with the tech, because I'm not good at that. And I want to acknowledge and thank our interpreters as well. Victoria, thank you.
It'll be just one more second.
No worries.
It'll be another moment. I'm having some technical issues getting the video to play, so just give me one more second, please.
Yeah, no problem. Tamika, take your time.
Hollywood sucks. It is so the norm to exclude disability.
You're not showing people what this really looks like.
That this can happen to anybody.
Even to this day, a lot of people are intimidated to meet me or shake my hand.
And, walled for jobs. Part of that is because of what people have seen in Hollywood.
I'm tired of asking, begging for equal opportunity.
I had to complete my wardrobe fitting on the sidewalk outside.
And then I heard one of the casting directors kind of start to giggle and then not look up.
An industry where you can recreate the sinking of the Titanic, but you can't get a ramp on a makeup trailer. I don't understand.
Some films, just basic films, will be happy to take on a deaf actor, but won't provide an interpreter. They say it's due to budget and so on.
And as actors with disabilities, when we speak up, we don't know if we'll ever work for those people again.
So just take the time to learn.
Like, inclusion is here to stay.
So get it right the first time.
DIH, Disability in Hollywood. Change the norm. disabilityinhollywood.weebly.com.
Hollywood.
All right, so now we've got a 3-minute break and then the closing. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and I'll see you in 3 minutes. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.